Well, let's go back to our main news tonight. And the battle to stop the self-styled Islamic State advanced through Syria and Iraq. Despite overnight bombing by America and her allies, the Islamist militants have continued their advances in northern Syria, driving more Kurdish refugees across the border into Turkey. Well, our foreign affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman is in the town of Suruç on the Turkey-Syria border, and he joins us now. Jonathan, give us the latest from there.
Well, Kathy, Turkey has so far refused to join this coalition of the willing in airstrikes against the so-called Islamic State. It has not, for example, offered the use of the Incirlik air base in southern Turkey to American jets. But there are signs, strong signs, that Turkey is changing its mind. This is what President Erdogan of Turkey has been saying in New York in the last 24 hours. We will give the necessary support, he says. The support could be military or it could be logistics. So what has changed President Erdogan's mind? Well, it's partly because 46 Turkish hostages were released by Islamic State at the weekend, which has given the Turks more flexibility to be more aggressive. But what also may have changed President Erdogan's mind is the sheer number of Kurdish refugees who've been crossing into Turkey in the last few days. In the dust and the heat, this is how life as a Kurdish refugee begins. They crossed from Syria in their hundreds today, probably because most who want to flee Kobane already have. Around 140,000 since last week, says the Turkish government, and the UN says it's planning on the basis that the remaining 250,000 or so might decide to leave as well. That may depend on whether American-led airstrikes can halt the jihadist advance. The terrorists came, so we left, said this man. They beheaded a man in our village, and they have no mercy. Whatever the world does to stop them will help us go home. Yet Kurdish commanders claim more Islamic State jihadists have converged on Kobane since this week's airstrikes began. The group has filmed its fighters throwing down the Kurdish flag and replacing it with their caliphate of fear. Just across the border in Turkey, they are nervous. More airstrikes could halt this refugee crisis, but they could also turn parts of northern Syria into a de facto Kurdish state. This afternoon, Turkish Kurds demonstrated on their side of the border in support of their Kurdish brethren in Syria. Long live the struggle, they chanted. Kurdistan will be the graveyard of the Islamic State. Then Turkish riot police moved in and forced the protesters to leave. The crowd had called the Turkish government killers, and rather too much rebellion was in the air. What began as a peaceful demonstration here in support of Kurds fighting in Syria has turned into a Turkish police operation. What the Turks are doing is driving protesters back into Turkey and apparently trying to stop young Kurds from crossing into Syria to fight. You can argue that the storm over Syria is partly of Turkey's making. It let many jihadists in, and now these desperate refugees are flowing out. This crisis not just lapping over Turkey's borders, but forcing it to take sides, whether to help the Americans bomb Turkey's neighbour, whatever the consequences. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, on the Turkish frontier.